Happy Sunday, everybody. Today we are looking at the Bachmann 8-40CW DCC and sound-equipped engine. All right, so we're just going to jump into this thing. Like I mentioned, this is the Bachmann 8-40CW. As far as I know, all of these engines come DCC sound-equipped, but I have a particular reason why I'm jumping into this engine, and it requires a little bit of history of some of the engines that I have reviewed on my channel before. And a couple pieces of information: if you haven't checked out my 8-40CW Atlas version 2 DCC engine review, I'd probably go watch it before checking this one out, because I am going to refer to it quite a bit in this review. Also, if you haven't seen any of my previous reviews, my Bachmann reviews tend to be full of a lot of, give and take, a lot of compromise when it comes to some things. And this engine isn't any different. There's quite a few things that I like and quite a few things I dislike. And honestly, I'm a little confused with what Bachmann was trying to do when they came to market with this thing. So we got a lot to talk about when it comes to body and how this thing looks, as well as electronics. There's some things you definitely need to know before you jump into one of these. And then, we will kind of do a comparison with the other two engines that I got sitting on the layout here. So let's zoom in, take a look at this thing, and just see some of the detail that we do get on this. All right, so we're zoomed in here. We're going to take a look. A little bit history on this thing. I really have been trying to find some good Dash 8 models for my collection, and I was hoping that this might be one, because I have two BNSF 8-40 BWs, and they're older Atlas version 1 DCC frames. They run a little loud, they're a little bit clunky, but I really have enjoyed them for the longest time, and I love the way they look. There's something about a Dash 8, I don't know, they have a little bit clunkier look than a Dash 9. The different trucks kind of give them a different look, and I don't know, they were kind of rare when I was growing up. The Dash 9s kind of took over. So when you see them, it was kind of a cool sight, and I've had a love for them for a long time. So I ended up picking that NS from Atlas, that version 2 DCC ready engine, and I had some gripes. And honestly, when we look at this engine, I'm going to kind of have the same gripes. Bachmann, I'm not quite sure what they were doing here. This is a relatively expensive engine, and compared to, say, that Atlas engine, which actually comes in most of the time, big asterisk there, cheaper than this particular engine, I'm not quite sure how they plan to get the kind of money that they're asking out of these things. Now, I will really preface that and say that there are some big asterisks there, and we'll get to that when we talk about that at the end. But let's kind of take a look at this and go over some of the detail I'm a little confused about. It comes with some nice options, like you have sunshades pre-installed. That's nice. The steps are painted from the factory, painted handrails, which is something that Atlas always does, and I really like that that's done from the factory. The one thing I kind of dislike is you can see the cab here, right here at the seam, isn't properly attached. It's a little bit helter-skelter there. A little better work going together would have been nice. Up front, and we'll talk lights when we talk the DCC section, but this is more similar to an older Atlas when we get to that. There are molded in ditch lights, but there's no light in them. You'd have to drill them out and install separate LEDs to have working ditch lights. However, the MU hoses are all up there. They come out of the, zoom in here, come out of the front of the snowplow. There's the, the electronic connection up there, which is a nice little touch. The Bachmann coupler on this is just like all the other ones. It's oversized and sticks out too far, but in practice, it really does work well. There's a lot of left and right sway to it, so it don't have problems with it derailing things. The one major gripe that I have with this, and excuse the handrail popping out there, I've been handling this a little bit during the pre-review run. If you haven't seen that, go check it out. It really displays the sound on this model pretty well, and we'll get to that in the electronics section as well. But the one thing I really dislike about this is it has the same monster truck effect that that NS unit had. It is slightly better, but it is still there. And let me just tip this up slightly. You can see that there's a pretty decent gap between the truck set and the bottom of the body. This is approximately 50% better than that Atlas version 2 DCC frame. The camera doesn't quite pick it up, but the trucks on this have a very plasticky tone to them. So if I was to keep this on the layout, it's going to need some weathering to kind of clean a little bit of that up. Up front, the handrails look a little finicky. They're not as nice as some other things, but they're there and they're more prominent than a Kato. So that is something to be said. Also, we have windshield wipers and the top hand grabs installed, as well as the sand ports there. So they look a little chintzy, but they're added detail that you wouldn't see on a Kato. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other there. It's kind of your own perception. The one thing that I will say is the body, as we go back here, nice deep ridges on all of the door panels, and the paint is nicely applied. There's no gaps. Everything looks really good. The small details are all legible, although there's not that many of them. I don't know if that's just a Canadian Pacific doesn't have as many decals or what have you. Or excuse me, Canadian National, sorry. But yeah, all of the grills and radiators are nice and deep. The horn is a little bit small, to be honest with you, and kind of chintzy looking. Not my favorite, but honestly, when I got the Atlas version, which we'll look at here in a second, it's about the same. So that might be a shared component between the two. The one thing I will say about this is the radiator grills back here are a little subpar compared to some of the other options out there. Rear handbrake right there, nice and separately applied. And again, I'm going to get here and you're going to see a massive monster truck effect. I don't know why this is just a thing with all the Dash 8s, but it certainly is. The tread on the walkway is visible, but it is less pronounced than some other models. It gives the effect, but it is harder to see, especially in black. And again, on the back, we've got all the MU hoses and whatnot, all applied from the factory, so that's nice. And you'll see that the coupler does really stick out a long ways on the rear of this. So, more than likely, if I was to keep this, I would probably consider swapping this over to a microtrains conversion. I have not felt the need to cut the hose off on this. It sits up high enough that it isn't in the way. One thing about the Bachman couplers is I have less of an issue with the exposed springs coming off and getting lost compared to, say, the scale trains engines. These do stay installed better. For the most part, I generally try to stay away from couplers that have the external springs because they disappear. But in this case, I haven't had any issues, and I have had some relatively large amount of runtime with this particular engine. I really think that this is unfortunately a 50-50 thing. Like, it is nicer than some Katos in certain ways and kind of lackluster in other, and they are really asking a premium price. So buyer beware when looking at these online. They are a little chintzy compared to some of their other higher end counterparts that they fall into the same price range with. Okay, slight change of scenery. We want to talk a little bit about the electronics on this. We're going to start with the lights and some of the running features. Then we will talk about the actual decoder and the usability and my issues with this particular decoder. The lights on this are acceptable. We'll flip them on here. They are currently in the dim position, which is approximately the same as the NCE sitting beside it. What you can notice, though, is we have lit number boards, which is a nice little addition. One side's a little brighter than the other. That is what it is. The one thing I don't particularly like is the window on the front entrance door is lit as well. So that's a little bit of a disappointment, but in dim mode, they're acceptable, and we'll give it just a tick of throttle, and you see they really pop up and get bright there. Absolutely acceptable when it comes to the brightness. They are not quite as bright as a TCS in, say, a Kato, which is kind of the gold standard. The one thing that I really wish these had for the price point is I wish the ditch lights were lit. The one thing I will say is from the factory, the lights on this are not properly set up, and I will get to that when I get to the decoder programming. But without JMRI, I'm not sure how what CVs actually need to be changed to get the lights to function properly. Out of the package, both the front and rear light are lit all the time. In the forward mode, rear light is dim and bright up front, and vice versa in reverse. This is fine for switching operations if that's what you were doing with this. However, I see this really more as a road engine, and so I prefer my rear light to be off and my front one to have the dimmable option standard. So from the factory, I don't really like the way they're set up. On JMRI, when you go into the lighting function, there is a special page that you just need to look at. Both forward Rule 17 and reverse Rule 17 need to be checked in the forward light and the reverse light. Both options are checked, and each of those you need to make it directional by selecting just one of them. So that generally, I would recommend JMRI for that. When it comes to programming this economy soundtracks decoder, the way you have to read the manual is a little more complicated than most people are capable of. Generally, they actually talk about the bits for each CV, and if you're using a Digitrack system or NCE or something of that nature, you need to actually calculate your own CV values. There are ways to do this on the internet. This is one thing that I really like about the ESU systems. Instead of calculating your CV, you can actually check your bit in like a visual representation, and it makes it really easy for setting things up that way. But for the average person, that gets a little more complicated. JMRI definitely helps with this. For programming these economy decoders, I would recommend using JMRI, probably for this next reason. So when it comes to slow speed and high speed control, this decoder has a really nice functionality. It actually, and future me, go ahead and insert the poll video right here. I have made a few passes. So far, 7 cars is a pretty easy poll for this particular engine. And 8 seems to be right about where we're running out of oomph at 20-ish scale miles per hour. A little bit slow pulling the hill here. Let me just give it just a little bit more. Definitely feeling the load of 8 cars. Maintaining our speed decently as we come up into the hill. However, as we get the majority of the cars in the grade, we are going to slow down pretty substantially. And right about there, we're stalled out. We are picking up traction every once in a while, but that is pretty much the stall right there. So, looks to be 7 cars is where this engine pretty well gives it up. And now that you've seen that, the this actually competes directly with a Kato SD40-2, which is what I'm setting up to be the standard for my pull, the ability for an engine to pull. So if you have access to my chart, the thing that I really like about this is it is basically on par with the SD40-2. It runs nice and quietly, and at the what I call one tie at a time setting, which is the slowest setting in which you can get the engine to run smoothly, it actually outpulls the 20 scale mile per hour up the hill situation. Now, I have my theories as to why this is, and I'm going to go into that into a different video, but 8 cars, and mind you, the cars that I'm using are some of the hardest ones to pull that I have enough of to standardize the test. 8 cars for one engine is rather impressive. So a 7-car standard stall, 8-car barely makes it up the hill, and maintaining that 8-car at one tie at a time speed makes this engine very good when it comes to pulling power. The thing that I do really like is while all this is maintained, even up into the higher speeds, 60-ish scale miles per hour, we still have a nice quiet drive mechanism. The one thing that I am really going to get into that I dislike is the programmability of those settings, though. So now we're back in kind of the standard orientation here, and this is a setting that really threw me for a loop for a while, and it actually took a little bit of research to figure out. I have not ran into this on most other engines, so it was a little bit of a new thing for me. And I gotta say, I maybe ran into this on another one of my Athearn models that has a Soundtracks decoder installed. I have yet to run into it on the higher end Soundtracks decoders, but this particular one has the CV, which is 29 in this case, set to default to the 14 level speed step custom like speed table. So if you were trying to speed match this out of the box, CV2, CV6, and CV5 have zero effect on the speed on this thing. It took me quite a bit of time to figure out that you actually need to get into CV29, change one of the bits to swap back over to having simple speed matching set up. Now, I very well could have done this on JMRI and used the 14 speed step, or to do that. However, in most cases, I find that to really not be necessary. And to be 100% honest with you, if I want to just put this in a quick consist, it's so much easier to speed match on the main by adjusting those values in real time while it's running with another engine. That's something I really like to do. So it was a bit of an inconvenience till I figured that out. I need to go back and check, and I will insert a notation here if I can. I believe the CV value that I needed to change 29 to was 40. And after that, I was able to properly adjust my speed with just the simple CV settings. The other issue that you are going to run into is hooking this up to JMRI can be a little more tricky than, say, a standard system. So here is my caveat when it comes to programming these Soundtracks decoders. They require a lot of power to actually get the CV to write to the board. So you need a booster, or you need a way to connect JMRI to your main so you can, use your actual DCC system to connect and flash the power. A standard DCC++, which is generally what I use for programming with JMRI, does not have enough power to actually write settings to this. I fortunately had the ESU system still around when I was doing the original speed matching for this engine, so I'm able to connect wirelessly through JMRI, program all my CVs via the programming track through my my layout and my ESU system. This provides enough power to do so. However, if you were a new user, which this model really goes to the new or the intermediate level user. This is not a guy that's got a lot of experience is probably not looking at one of these engines. They're just simply not high quality enough. So the intermediate user could run into some issues. I, for the longest time, just use a DCC++ system to do all my programming. It is really, unless the DCC system you have has an easy way to connect to your computer in JMRI, it's the cheapest way for the standard person to get a interface to use a computer to program one of these. That is a big knock on soundtracks for me. I think that they should be simpler to program, especially for the market they're going for. I've had issues with lock sound in the past, and I still do, that they're so complicated. They really kind of need an easier, simpler set of CVs for the average person. I think a lot of lock sound locomotives, especially now that they're moving into the mid to high tier Atlases that really bridge the gap between, say, $150 Cato with the TCS into the $200 to $250 Scale Trains engines running, superior lock sound sound files and whatnot. If there was a simpler way to program some of that stuff and do some of the easier things, that gap right there is quite the place to be, to intermediate going into advanced user. And you could get a lot of people locked into your system if you had a simple way to do that. And I think that's something that Broadway does pretty well. I just don't like that Broadway doesn't have any way to upgrade any of their software or anything like that. That is kind of the downside. So I kind of went into this economy decoder hoping that I could kind of figure it out. Since I struggled so much on that GP40 and that SD45, now that I had a whole bunch more information, and I realized that a lot of my programming issues came from that DCC++ system not having enough power, I thought maybe I could really dig into this and find some cool things. And there are some other preloaded sound files that you can mess with, some different horns and whatnot. But again, without JMRI, it's next to impossible to access some of these things without having a good understanding of how a DCC system works and how to change CV numbers using the bit and byte system. So I really want to find that intermediate class that's good and upgradable. The economy decoder by Soundtracks just really isn't my jam. And I know they're kind of a standard in the HO thing, and a lot of people have a lot of love for Soundtracks, but personally, I think there are better options out there. So with all of that said, let's actually talk about the sound that's in this unit. It has a startup and shutdown procedure. I generally disable those things, and I did that in this unit as well. Unless I would actually be going out to make a video on it, I prefer to just get my trains running. So I have it set up so the sound just comes on or shuts off. There's no startup or shutdown procedure. One thing that I found that does not work on this the way I have it configured, and maybe I have a setting messed up, but I've struggled with it since the get-go, is the manual throttle up, throttle down feature using your function 5 and 6 don't seem to work properly. Now, they did work properly on those other units I had. However, on this one, it just seems to have something incorrectly configured, and I'm not sure what it is. The sound file on this is okay. It is tends to work pretty good, and as it's moving up through your speed steps and the allotted increments between each notch, I do like the way the prime mover sounds. It's not as good as, say, that Atlas up there with the lock sound in it. Much better sound file on that, in my opinion. But this does pass the sniff test. It sounds like decently like a Dash 8, and the all of the functions seem to sound pretty good. One thing I do like about this is the random sounds don't just overwhelm the prime mover, and that's something that a couple of Broadways have had an issue with. You can easily program that out, but from the factory, this seems to be pretty good. The other thing I will say about the sound in this is excellent job with the Soundtracks decoder and mating it to a proper speaker. I ended up having to turn the volume down on this unit. It was much louder than some of my others, kind of the standard volume. I like to run all of them. So having the ability to reach out a little bit more and get a little bit louder on bigger layouts, or say you're hard of hearing or whatever, having the ability to go louder is a nice thing, and I do appreciate that they got that properly sorted out. All of the sounds seem to be pretty good. The bell's nice and crisp. The horn is good. If you hold it for a period of time, you can kind of hear the step where it repeats itself. It's not as bad as some other sound files, so they did a pretty good job with that. The short horn works really good. I don't necessarily feel the need to have that, but that's kind of a Soundtracks thing. That's all fine and good. The fan noises are a little bit janky to me, but other than that, most of the stuff seems to work pretty good. I wish this had a feature that those Ather and F45s had, and their throttle up, throttle down feature worked properly, but for the most part, when I want to pull a hill, I want to go straight to 8. And they have that feature. You can press a button, and the prime movers work all the way up to notch 8. And awesome feature. I wish they had that in this particular unit. One potential downside, and I talk about this with all of my Bachmans, as well as any other model that does that, when in mute, there is no access to the horn or the bell. Real big problem for me. I love the ability to give a little honk at my son when he's watching the trains, and I don't have to have the sound turned on. All right, so with my issues with the decoder out of the way, and some of the sound stuff that drives me nuts, like not being able to access the horn, we need to talk about the issue that I have with the price point on this engine. So you get on the internet anywhere, and DCC sound locomotives are generally pretty expensive. So for context, most of the new Atlas engines are kind of coming out in that $170 to $190 price point. There's a few of them up in that $210, $220 range, but they're being pretty aggressive. They're putting lock sound systems in there from the factory, and those kind of price points are what really make this engine difficult to recommend. And you go to like Scale Trains engines, which are on a total different level of quality compared to this, and yeah, they're in the $220 to $250 range, and you get so much more for your money, so much better drive mechanism, and just honestly better sound files. So you have Atlas really competing hard with these guys to try and take some of that market share. And I think Bachman was trying to slip into that. They price these anywhere from $200 to $220. And that's generally where you see all of them on the internet right now, is right around that $210 average dollars. I've really been looking for a Santa Fe -8, and I thought I maybe would try to pick one of these up. But for that kind of price point, I just could not get myself on board. Well, I happened across an ad on Train World a couple months ago where they had one of these on sale for $125. Well, now we're talking. If the whole setup was that kind of money, any one of these engines was $125 to $135 with sound at DCC, well, now we're talking. These things would be a value upon value. Like I said, when we were looking at the visuals on this, these kind of sort of have some better, some worse points than a Cato, and you'd be right in that price range of putting a good decoder, non-sound decoder in a Cato. This pulls just as well as them, has a nice quiet drive mechanism, and could be weathered up to look pretty decent. So for that kind of price point, we're really talking something that would be super good for the market. That would really drive sound locomotives down. And the thing that bothers me is most of them are selling for that $210, $220 range. So that really makes me wonder, if Train World can fire sale these for $125, what is the net cost? And why are all these dealers pushing these things for so much money? These are not worth that kind of dollar figure, and nobody should be buying them for that $210, $220. They're just not up to the quality standards of other engines. For that kind of money, they should have working ditch lights. The cab should be a little bit nicer. You know how I said it, it's a little bit tweaked. Should be no light bleed or anything like that, like the front door. Some of the body detail needs to be cleaned up. The plastic should look less plasticky in situations, and we need to get rid of these junk couplers at that kind of price point. If we got into that situation, this very well could be worth that kind of money. And this does have about 100 hours of runtime on it, so I'm comfortable saying that it runs pretty good. And the pickups generally are pretty decent as well. I didn't have any bad, I generally only bring pickups up if I'm having a situation with them. So this is electrically a pretty sound unit. And it really upsets me that there are situations in which they can be sold that cheap, and in general, when they're being sold to the public, they're twice the money. That is just unacceptable to me. Someone is trying to make too much money there, and I don't know if that's map pricing coming from Bachman, or if Train World just needed to get rid of some old stock, so they sold them out for net and just took a loss there. I mean, even at net, you're adding $90 to $100 to the price on that, so you're doubling your money. And in certain circumstances, I work for a business and I know the finances. I understand how that works, but these are drastically overpriced for what they are. I think Bachman needs to be more aggressive with their pricing on these. If they can get them into dealers' hands for, $90 net or whatever, and they can be sold for $130, $140, now we're talking a price point that these things would be deserving of, and honestly, it would really make a shift in the market. These are good enough at that price point to really start taking a hold on things and hopefully driving the rest of the industry down to a lower price point. So, as with all of my other Bachmann reviews, I'm really torn with my recommendation on these. At that cheap price point, there's nothing wrong with these. They're excellent engines. It functions really well, and I think it is a good value at that. But at that $200 some odd price point, that's ridiculous. It's insane, and no one should be paying it. And I'm sorry if you bought that and that offends you. They're not worth that kind of money. So if these are still available on Train World and you're okay with the CN paint scheme, absolutely go pick it up for $125. It's going to be a pretty nice addition to any layout, and it's nice to see a Dash 8 every now and then. Like I said at the beginning, a really cool part of American rail history and should be part of every layout, in my opinion. And if you're looking for one of those other road numbers, I would totally pass, unless you're finding a good used one at $100-ish price point, or buying another one of these from Train World. I can't recommend it at any other price. But anyway, thanks for stopping by, everybody. Don't like these reviews where I got to be critical of things, but it's part of the game. So yeah, I will see you next week. Have a good rest of your weekend.